Back here on New York's longest running sports call-in show, Jackson Heil, Nick DeLuca, and a pleasure to be joined by Filip Bondy of the New York Daily News. Philip, thanks so much for taking the time with us today. How's everything going, and how's life been during these crazy times?
Oh, we're hanging in here. I'm definitely in the high risk group, so I have to be even more careful than you guys.
Well, we appreciate you taking some time here on One, and we're going to get right into it. Obviously, some tragic news coming this past week. Diego Maradona, soccer legend, Argentine legend more specifically, passes away from heart failure at the age of 60 years old. We'll get into all of that, but just want to get your initial reaction to when you first heard the news.
Yeah, well, my first reaction, frankly, was unfortunately, I'm not too surprised. I mean, we'd heard a lot about his health problems in recent years, and those health problems were no surprise either, given his lifestyle, his well-known lifestyle. You know, he didn't take care of himself, basically.
Yep.
Never did. He was the Mickey Mantle of soccer in that regard, I suppose. Mantle drank his liver to oblivion, and Diego took too many drugs and couldn't stop doing that for one reason or another. And it was a problem. It was a big problem for him throughout. So yeah, I wasn't surprised, but I of course began to replay some of his goals in my mind, and I went on YouTube and I replayed some of those highlights, and just to remind myself how amazing he was.
I thought it was funny that you mentioned Mickey Mantle off the jump, because I was going to ask you, is there somebody to compare Diego Maradona to, for those who aren't as familiar with his career and soccer, because he's such a complicated figure to unpack?
Yeah, it's hard. There are amazing athletes like Lawrence Taylor, maybe. Another example of somebody who didn't really live by the rules of the game at the time. And Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry had all kinds of problems with with cocaine in the 80s and 90s. So yeah, there are plenty of examples of these stars that probably, as Mickey Mantle once said, if I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. He fully expected to die in his 30s, because I believe his father had died at a very young age, and he figured he would as well. So these things, some of these incredibly talented athletes, and they can be, you can say geniuses are close to the Beethovens and the Mozarts and the Van Goghs. There's genius is close to madness, and I think this, in some ways, Maradona was a genius in his field, and maybe there's a connection there as well.
Philip, I want to talk about the talent of Diego Maradona for a moment, because I think for a lot of us, like myself, who didn't have the pleasure of being able to grow up with him and grow up with his talent, I don't think a lot of people understand really how good he was and how much he meant to the sport. For someone who covered him and got to see him win the 1986 World Cup and saw him at Barcelona, Juventus, and all over the place, how would you describe his talent to someone who never really got to watch him in action?
It just, and I do advise everybody to go on YouTube and take a look at some of these things that he did, the amazing things that he did. But the ball was on his foot, and the ball never seemed to leave his foot, and nobody could take it off his foot. His first touch. I coach girls freshman high school soccer here in Montclair, New Jersey, and what we talk about all the time is first touch. Can you keep that ball 1 foot, 2 feet away from you on that first touch? And nobody had a first touch like Maradona. Nobody. He stopped the ball dead. I mean, no matter how hard, no matter what angle the ball was coming from, it was dead on his foot, dead on arrival. And then he would do you know, he could hit people on the fly. He could hit them in stride. You know, Johnny Unitas throwing passes downfield. Again, I'm dating myself. But by the way, Johnny Unitas, the greatest quarterback who ever lived, because you're talking about the difference between a songwriter and a singer. Johnny Unitas called his own plays. He wrote his own songs. The guys today, they don't write their own songs. All right. So to me, Johnny Unitas is the greatest quarterback who ever lived. Anyway, that's going way off topic. But yeah, you know, I think that what he did more than anything was, you know, in a word, control of the ball to the point of absurdity. And it's what we try to teach kids, you know, today, you know, like I said, first touch and trapping the ball and just basics like that. If you want to learn that, you can watch some tapes, because, and he could change speeds on the dribble. He could just change, boom, 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 boom. You know, you just didn't know what he was going to do and when he was going to do it. And he was willing to stretch the rules, as we all know, you know, the hand of God goal, and made him famous for that. But, you know, he was a ruffian of sorts, and that made him more lovable in the eyes of the Argentinians. And it also made him beloved in Napoli, because Naples is a land of outlaws. You know, it's a city of outlaws. That's what it prides itself in. And when he played in Napoli, he fit that city to a T, you know, so they loved him there. They're in just as a large period of mourning in Napoli, in Naples, as they are in Argentina, because boy, he was part of that city. He knew their heart. Mm-hmm.
Philip, in your article in the New York Daily News, you wrote, "No soccer player, in fact, has since equaled his creativity and precision forged from anarchy." What did Diego Maradona do? How did he change the game of soccer?
Well, I think that what he showed is what was still, you know, we were sort of going from an attacking style to a more defensive style at that era. And he blew that up a little bit, which is great. I mean, when, again, I talk about my own experience. When I played soccer in high school, we had a 2-3-5 formation, only 2 defenders, 3 midfielders, and 5 attackers. All right, nowadays, it's, you know, 4-4-2 is the standard, but there are other variations. But we, in the 60s, going into the 70s, it was a very attacking style of soccer that Pelé played in. But then there was this withdrawal from that, and just coaches took over, they overcoached, and it became too defensive. And that's when that stereotype of a 0-0 soccer game, you know, that Americans hate because there aren't enough goals. That's when that came about. But Maradona, he put that back in the game. He put attack back in the game at a time when it desperately needed it. Now, unfortunately, he wasn't always on a team in Argentina that scored all that many goals, and actually played a little bit conservatively, particularly in the 1990 World Cup, right through the final against West Germany. They were playing too many men behind the ball on defense, but they had Maradona. And as long as you have him, you have this flair, this attacking flair that was missing from the whole game at that time.
Speaking with Filip Bondy of the New York Daily News, and Philip, just a few more before we wrap this up. Obviously, in the latter stages of his life, and really over the last decade and a half, Maradona was in the news for all the wrong reasons. And that was a large part of his career, is that it just seemed like he couldn't stop making mistakes. I mean, even when it was the drugs, it was there was stuff with cocaine, obviously, the 2010 World Cup where things kind of unraveled for him against Germany when they lost 4-0. How do you think that Diego Maradona should be remembered by the world of football?
Well, again, luckily, we have these wonderful highlight videos, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how we should remember him. You know, he was a temperamental man with an enormous passion, and it didn't always work in his favor off the field, but on the field, what he did, we've never seen again. We have not seen it since. You might argue that Pelé showed a lot of that before Maradona, but since Maradona, I haven't seen it. You don't see that kind of passion. Certainly, as I mentioned in my article, Cristiano Ronaldo plays a completely different style of game. The closest you'll get is Lionel Messi, also Argentine. But Messi doesn't have the same flair. I'm sorry. He has the same skill set, which is an amazing masterpiece of a skill set, but he doesn't have the same passion. And he also doesn't have the success on the international stage that Maradona enjoyed as well. So we haven't seen another one. Go look at the highlights. Go look at them.
I've certainly spent my time on YouTube diving into that, and it's always a joy to watch him. But Phil, before we wrap up, we just had your son Stefan on before. Talking to him was a pleasure to get to dive into the Knicks and Nets and everything that's going on in the NBA world. I just want to ask, what's it been like watching your son follow in your footsteps to the New York Daily News and kind of taking that path that you took as well?
Yeah, well, it's funny. He didn't really show much interest when he was young in anything that I wrote, or in the, he followed sports obviously, but he didn't really read much in the paper. So it came as a surprise to me when in college he kind of announced that he was going to be going into journalism and then eventually into sports writing. Yeah, mixed feelings, because obviously it's a fun job. It's a crazy job that takes you all over the world. It took me to 40 different countries and to almost virtually every state of the United States. I got to cover World Cups, Olympics, and Wimbledon's and all that sort of stuff. And I think he's enjoying a lot of that same stuff. The only problem, as you guys probably know, is that this is not the healthiest in America. And so, or the world for that matter. The internet changed all of that. So we're constantly worrying a little bit about, the future and whether there will be these jobs there. But for now, he's doing a great job. Unfortunately, he has to cover the Knicks. That's not, but he's managed to, despite sometimes adversarial relationship with the Knicks, in fact, almost always an adversarial relationship with the Knicks, he's managed to get his share of stories and his share of scoops. He's doing a great job. And, we just hope that his job exists in 5-10 years from now.
Well, having an adversarial relationship with the Knicks is apparently part of the job nowadays, because he's not the only one, that's for sure. But he's doing a great job. And Philip, you did a great job. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Once again, Filip Bondy, the New York Daily News, giving us some time here on 101. Philip, thanks again. Hope you had a happy Thanksgiving and stay safe in these crazy times.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me.